Jamaica, welcome to another program of Centrally Speaking.
The program that opens up the conversation around important matters of economics and finance, matters of national importance that have an impact on your life. I'm Sheena.
And I'm Anna. We're so happy you could join us again. And welcome aboard to those of you who are joining for the very first time. We invite you to stay with us. You'll enjoy your company.
Yeah. We have a great show lined up for you because today's program, we will once again have a little chat with someone who is no stranger to Centrally Speaking. Robert Stennett, Deputy Governor at Bank of Jamaica.
Robert will be telling us all about inflation and the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. Do you know what that is?
We will certainly find out, but you know that before we hear from Robert, we first want to hear from you in the streets. And it's time for Street Check.
Can you identify the two faces that are on the new $5,000 note?
Yes, it's Hugh Shearer and Donald Sangster.
Donald Sangster and Hugh Shearer.
Donald Sangsters and what's the other person? Hugh Shearer.
Hugh Shearer and Donald Sangster.
Hugh Shearer and Donald Sangster.
Hugh Shearer and Donald Sangster.
Former Prime Ministers Hugh Shearer and Donald Sangster.
And you know, the Street Check is my favorite part of the show. Always great hearing the responses from the streets.
So, our mission here on Centrally Speaking is to break down economic matters in a way that everyone can understand.
Yeah, so on today's program, we will be looking into inflation and the Consumer Price Index. Robert Stennett, Deputy Governor at Bank of Jamaica, is our guest. Welcome to Centrally Speaking.
Thank you for having me.
Robert.
Welcome back. All right, so Robert, you are Deputy Governor at Bank of Jamaica. Tell us, Deputy Governor, with what responsibility?
Well, my portfolio has two areas.
Yes.
One is financial stability, and the other is research and economic programming. That second portfolio has a responsibility to oversee what is happening in the economy and to provide monetary policy advice. And the objective of the provision of monetary policy advice is to assure price stability.
Okay.
All right, so evidently, you are well poised to answer my first question. All right, so we understand the concept of financial stability. We want you to explain that for us and get into what is inflation.
Well, good question. Financial stability relates to all facets of the environment involving financial institutions that ensures that they remain safe and sound. There are two sources of risks in the financial sector. Either something can happen operationally that causes financial institutions to get into some sort of trouble, or something can happen in the economic environment. There can be a hurricane, there can be a storm, and their assets become impaired. So in relation to the second one, my portfolio responsibility is to ensure that I continue to review the external threats to the financial system and to ensure that they are properly guarded against. For price stability, my responsibility is to ensure that inflation remains consistent with the target that is set for the central bank by the government.
4 to 6%.
Yeah.
4 to 6%.
Oh, well, recently in the news, we heard about the inflation target for the next 3 years. So we just spoke to it, but tell us, why is it necessary to have that target? Remind us what it is again, and any other information you deem pertinent for our viewers at this time.
Sure. The minister in May announced to the nation that the target is 4 to 6%. And clearly, as you can see, the announcement of that target is the purview of the government.
Okay.
It is the instrument that is given to the central bank to operate on. I would say that the inflation target is a major policy instrument because on its announcement, it sets the environment for everybody to react around.
Okay.
So consumers know that for the next 3 years, there's an institution that is going to be working to deliver inflation in this target range. Businesses can plan, so they can make decisions about where they think prices are going to go, where interest rates are going to go. And of course, most importantly, the central bank now has that anchor that tells it what to do if it believes that the inflation is going outside of the target range.
Okay.
So it's a major target. It's a major issue.
So Robert, you just want to be clear. You inferred it already, but just to be clear, BOJ manages or controls inflation, but it doesn't measure it. So if it doesn't measure it, who measures it and how is it measured?
I think you have to separate the control of inflation from its measurement. You could not give responsibility to the institution that is controlling something, that is responsible for delivering it, and also allow them to measure it. Clearly, there are some moral hazards there.
All right.
So procedurally, inflation is measured by the Statistical Institute of Jamaica.
Okay.
And we refer to them as Statin for short.
So Robert, you referenced the Consumer Price Index. Tell us, what is it? How is the Consumer Price Index measured? And what exactly is it saying to us?
Well, that's a very technical question, so permit me to try to break it down to its simplest form.
Please.
The CPI is really just a number
Yes.
that represents how prices change from one period to another.
Okay.
And for example, we can use the period of, say, a month and take this particular example. Consider the price of bread. If today the price of bread is 100 and next month the price of bread is 200, then the CPI calculates this number that tells you that the price has gone up by 100%. How does it do this? Well, it simply puts the 200 over 100, creates this ratio, and you get 2, right? And so in its very simplest form, the CPI for bread is really the 2 which defines or explains that prices have gone up by 100% or twice the price in the base year. There are, of course, more than one items in the Consumer Price Index.
Okay.
So where the example I just gave you is for one item, what Statin does is compute it for many items.
Okay.
And what they have to do is add up all prices, and they simply add them up by considering how important they are by using weights. And they come up with the very same thing, a number, 2, 3, 4, that tells you how much prices have gone up by when you compare prices in the current period to prices in the base year. So that is essentially how the CPI is calculated and interpreted.
Okay. Thank you.
We have more questions for Robert Stennett, Deputy Governor at Bank of Jamaica. Centrally speaking, we'll be right back.
Welcome back to Centrally Speaking. Before the break, Robert explained what the CPI or Consumer Price Index is. So Robert, is CPI a good measure of true cost of living?
Well, what I can say, Sheena, is that it is one of the most widely used measure of changes in the cost of living in the world. But of course, no measure is perfect. And there are a number of reasons that people say and that we acknowledge why the CPI is not a perfect measure, but it is still the best. The first one is that the CPI measures changes in the cost of living for a selected consumer.
Right.
In the case of Jamaica, Statin selects that typical consumer that is considered lower income to middle income, right? So it does not represent the spending pattern of the rich, nor does it represent the spending patterns of persons who may not necessarily be in that group, generally speaking. So the first issue with the CPI is that it represents the average behavior or the average behavior of prices for a selected consumer. But in that basket, you may consume a particular set of products and I may consume another set of products. Those two sets of products, their prices may be going up at different rates.
Okay.
And therefore, you may experience one type of inflation while Anna is experiencing a different type.
Okay.
That's true.
And you both, by the
Don't
way,
go there.
That's true.
Yeah.
you both, by the way, can say, but that number that Statin puts out is not representative of you.
Yeah.
But the reality is that it's trying to find the average measure of price changes and not necessarily for you.
Okay.
The second one is that, as I said earlier, it doesn't capture the price changes for persons who are in the upper income. So if you have a yacht, for example,
Yeah, so them not going to catch that. Oh,
it will definitely not capture the fact that the price of the maintenance of the yacht is going up at a certain rate.
okay.
So it excludes those persons, and
okay.
they have to then compute their own price index. I would like to also note that the CPI is computed on the basis of fixed consumption bundles. So
You going to explain that?
yes, of course.
Okay.
So every 10 years or so, Statin finds out how much of each products consumers buy.
Okay.
So this is done in what we call a household expenditure survey,
Okay.
where people are asked how many pounds of flour do you buy per week, how many pounds of chicken do you buy per week, and those are recorded and held. So those are the weights that are used in the CPI for 10 years. But as time goes by, if I'm seeing where the price of chicken is going up, I may very well switch from buying 10 pounds of chicken to buying corned beef.
Yes.
So the importance of chicken in my basket is going to get less. The importance of corned beef is going to get more. And therefore, because it is a fixed weight index, the number that comes out for inflation may not necessarily be the same as I'm experiencing, given that I've shifted,
switched.
Right.
shifted my
Okay.
consumption
Right.
pattern.
Okay.
The last thing I'd like to say is that inflation is a measure of price change, but it is not necessarily a good indicator of the burden of the price level, right?
Okay.
And
Let me
what-
explain.
Right.
So if your hand is in a vice grip, I don't know if you know, somebody puts a vice grip on your hand and slowly turns it. The speed at which the vice grip is being turned is the pressure that inflation is exerting. But the pressure of the vice grip is the burden of the price on you.
Okay.
So even though I may be turning the vice grip very slowly, this is low inflation, unless something eases the pressure of the price change is going to become more and more until my bone snaps.
Wow.
So people are always saying, how can inflation be so low but I'm feeling so much pressure?
Right.
Well, that is simply because a better measure of the pressure is to compare the price level with my income, and not necessarily to look at the speed at which prices are changing.
Okay.
So there's always this issue about inflation. But in general, as I said before, inflation measured by the CPI is the best measure that we have, even though it has its various faults.
Okay.
All right, Robert, just going back to the mention of the household expenditure survey, because I had a question in mind. It was what triggers the changes in CPI, considering that culture and taste and buying patterns changed. So you alluded to that, that every 10 years, the survey is done and then the basket is adjusted and then reweighted, if I'm understanding correctly. But what happens between that 10 years?
So everything is moving at different pace, right? I may be adjusting my basket because prices are changing.
Right.
But, culture is changing. Taste and preferences are changing.
That's true.
And so the CPI has to be refreshed at a fast enough pace to
Right.
keep up with all of these changes. I don't know if you remember, but cell phones were introduced globally in about 1970s. It came to Jamaica in the 1990s. And when cell phones came to Jamaica, you and I never thought that we would ever use a cell phone. Those were things for the rich.
Right.
This morning, in fact, when I was on my morning run, I passed a gardener on his cell phone. And it struck me that now almost every Jamaican has a cell phone.
Yes.
So the concept of a cell phone is no longer that for the rich. It's now considered the average thing that everybody has.
So, Robert, since we all want to play our part in ensuring that we keep within that 4 to 6% inflation target, what bit of advice would you give to our viewers?
I think that is one of the best questions we've asked since the program started. There are a couple of things the central bank would like to ask Jamaicans to do.
Yes.
The first thing is manage your own personal expenses. Do not incur debt that is not wealth creating. Make a budget, shop around, eliminate unnecessary expenses. But I think the most important thing we can do personally is shop around. Do not go to the same location to buy the product over and over again without knowing what the prices are across a range of outlets, because that allows you to change where you buy from and therefore get the best out of the limited funds that you have. The second advice I would offer is that you also shop around where your bank is concerned. One of the reasons why the central bank's actions in conducting monetary policy is effective is when banks respond to the signals that we send.
Yeah.
So for example, if we were to increase interest rates,
Yes.
and you, the consumer, do not see an increase in the interest rates that you earn on your savings, I would advise you to move your money.
Okay.
And the act of moving your money from bank A to bank B helps the central bank to achieve the objective that it has, because the banks now will be responding to our signals more when they know that you have an informed customer who knows that the central bank wishes for interest rates to rise and is moving their money to get the best opportunities that exist. So we strongly try to ensure the information is available to consumers. You need to now make yourself aware of the information and act accordingly. The bank has in fact been doing a number of things to facilitate your ability to move money around, all of which we wrap up in the title account portability.
Okay.
So in the very near future, our hope and desire is that the consumers will find it easier to move their accounts from bank to bank. We intend to give them all the information that they have, that they need. We intend to reduce the amount of pain that they feel in moving the money. So, you know, when you go to a new bank to open an account, you go through a lot of hurdles in providing your proof of address, your proof of income, and so on. We're trying to implement an EKYC framework that allows you to move your information from one bank to the next. And to the extent possible, we're going to try to ensure that the ability of the consumer to move money is as seamless as possible, if necessary, at the click of a button. So those, I think, are some of the important things that I would say consumers should do. Shop around, both for goods but also for finance, and move around. Move your money. Move your business from one business to the next. And with that, you will not only protect yourself from high inflation, but you are actually helping the central bank to achieve its objective.
Well, on that note, we end our conversation with Robert Stennett. As usual, another fascinating conversation, this demystifying another aspect of the economy, learning about inflation and the consumer price index. Thank you so much, Robert.
Thanks for spending some time with us.
It was my pleasure.
We have been speaking with Robert Stennett, Deputy Governor of Bank of Jamaica. He has been educating us on the ABCs of the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. Centrally speaking, we'll be right back after the break. On today's episode, Robert Stennett, Deputy Governor at Bank of Jamaica, explained inflation and the Consumer Price Index. Here's a recap of the conversation. You know what time it is? It's time for the Fast Facts. Number 1. In May 2024, the Minister of Finance confirmed Bank of Jamaica's inflation target remains at 4 to 6% per annum for the next 3 years. The inflation target is a major policy instrument for the government of Jamaica. Number 2. One measure of inflation is the 12-month change in the Consumer Price Index, otherwise called the CPI. Number 3. The CPI is a measure of the rate of price change. It is an index or a number that compares prices at the beginning of a period with prices at the end of that period. Number 4. The Statistical Institute of Jamaica, STATIN, is responsible for collecting and reporting on the CPI, from which inflation is calculated. And number 5, the CPI is the most widely used measure of inflation across the world. It measures changes in the cost of living for selected consumers. And that's the Fast Facts for today. Hope you enjoyed today's program.
That's our program for this week.
Follow us on X and Facebook at Central Bank JA, at Central Bank Jamaica on Instagram, and on BOJ's YouTube channel. You can also visit our website, boj.org.jm.
We also invite you to send in your question on X or Facebook.
And of course, tune in again to Centrally Speaking next week at the same time right here on your station when we will have another special guest. I'm Anna.
And I'm Sheena.
Thanks for watching.
See you next week. Centrally Speaking is a production of Bank of Jamaica.